But gluten had an association with elevated anxiety, as did sugar, as did sweetness.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Health Theory. I am here with Dr. Uma Naidoo. I am so excited to have you. I am thrilled by the very notion of what you do, which is nutritional psychiatry, which I didn't know existed, but I'm excited that it does. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Tom. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you.
Yeah, this one really is something that I'm doing backflips for. When I started, I was doing all mindset stuff, and I started doing Health Theory, this show, and people were like, why is the mindset guy talking about health? And my thing is, if you don't understand that the brain and the body are connected, then you are in for a world of hurt. You've got
It's
to
true.
really understand how to make those work. You're a
Yeah.
trained psychiatrist. When did you come along to the nutritional element, and what exactly is nutritional psychiatry?
Sure. So the way that I came to this was that I grew up in a family that was all about love and food and nurturance and a lot of cooking. And so I was always, fond of food and wanted to know more. But it was also a family of physicians. So I knew I was headed to medical school, and I always just wanted to know more about food. And when I began to have conversations with patients in residency, so I sort of brought or tapped into my background in really raised in a household where there was meditation, mindfulness practice, understanding of the mind body connection, Ayurvedic principles. And I didn't use those specifically, but I really brought that mindset to practicing with my patients. And I began to say things to them like, well, if you're taking this medication, are you doing any form of exercise? Are you doing any kind of movement? What are you doing? What are you eating? And it grew. The interest grew, and I began to have more of that conversation. So that existed in the way that I was practicing. But separate to that, my passion trip was to culinary school. That was just because I went, because Julia Child is my food hero, and I wanted to be like her. So I wanted to learn more, and that kind of fitted together in a cool way with everything else.
Yeah, I think your book in some other countries is called The Food Mood Connection.
Exactly. Yes. Called the
So
food mood connection in the UK and a few other countries.
that to me is so important for people to understand. We've got obviously depression and anxiety have been skyrocketing for decades, and originally it was like a question of, well, are we just getting better at diagnosing it? But it really hasn't changed. It seems like it really is going crazy. And what I loved about your book is that you're going through some of the disorders that you would normally hear a psychiatrist speak about. That's normally, depression, anxiety,
Exciting.
PTSD, OCD. I mean, just like the list goes on and on. And normally it would just always be medication. And so the fact that you give like really specific prescriptions for things that you can eat or avoid eating,
Yes.
that's really, really powerful. So when we talk about this stuff beginning to skyrocket, let's get right into specifically with anxiety. So I suffered from debilitating anxiety at one point in my life. Unfortunately, for as much as I should have recognized there was probably a huge dietary component, I came to that very late. So I understand how brutal generalized anxiety can be. What are some of the major triggers? And then how do we begin unwinding that?
Sure. So I think that for anxiety, one of the things I often start talking to people about is the foods to avoid. Generally, I talk about a whole foods diet and ask people to incorporate foods rather than give them up. But in anxiety, we notice there's a correlation with gluten. So, it's always about the source of the gluten you have. If you're having a shelf-stable loaf of bread from the supermarket that sits on your counter for 3 weeks and looks perfect, you have to ask yourself, that's not the bread we're speaking of here. But gluten had an association with elevated anxiety, as did sugar, as did sweetness.
Can we get
And
into the biomechanism? Like what is going on? Why are those, is everything going to come down to the epithelial lining of the gut, and this is a leaky gut problem, or is it something else?
the mechanisms tend to differ, and we go through that in the different chapters of the book. But I think that the overall major mechanism that runs through every single diagnosis is the gut-brain axis. the preponderance of inflammation that these substances drive, like sugar. And as the leaky gut and the intestinal permeability gets set up, there's also the dysbiosis that is happening because the bugs are just not getting the right foods that they need to thrive. So you have dysbiosis being set up. Then they're not able to form things like the short-chain fatty acids that they need and the butyrates to really help the gut thrive. So sugar is one of them. Artificial sweetness is another. Stevia was found to have, even though stevia and erythritol, if you are going to use a sweetener separate to all of this, may be better options, but in anxiety it was not. Processed vegetable oils. I've had individuals.
Really fast before we move off of
Yeah.
artificial sweeteners. So
Yeah.
I have a feeling that a big driver for my anxiety was artificial sweeteners. I was drinking 3 large monsters a day plus 2 or 3 Diet Cokes. And it helped me get lean. It was amazing because it filled me up, the carbonation and the sweetness, and it allowed me to intake a lot less calories. But I think that was a big part of it. What is going on? What is it about either those specifically diet sodas or artificial sweeteners in general? What is the sort of dysbiotic response?
Sure. So the one of the things is that there's an elevation in the level of sweetness. So a tiny packet of a sweetener is super sweet. So in one way, it's impacting your brain because you are now expecting this super sweet flavor. Then the actual substances are gut disruptors. And the third mechanism is that they are not, and that's why I mentioned stevia and erythritol, they have a better mechanism related to insulin. And so in addition to the brain problems that things like artificial sweeteners set up for us by driving anxiety, they disrupt the gut and our brain gets used to this hyper sweetened taste. Because often patients will say that, you talking to me about not having sugar sweetened beverages. So I'm going to have the diet soda of some kind. But what they've noticed is that sometimes they crave more sweet foods. And often those foods are carbohydrates. So we talk about almost trying to either heal your gut or help your gut along so that the bugs in your gut are working for you and not against you. And, sugar, basically sweeteners just are doing the opposite of what we need them to do. Sugar, on the other hand, there's an actual correlation between depression, several trials linking depression and sugar intake, the added sugars, and also related to the level of anxiety. So, sugar works in a slightly different way in the sense that initially you might have this, good feeling. Someone has a bowl of ice cream and like, I can't understand why my doctor tells me not to eat this. I feel good. What's wrong with her? But the truth is that, over time, what happens is that if it affects your neurons, the sugar is not good for us. It may make you feel emotionally good in the moment, but it's really not good in the longer term. So, I think what I feel people have not made the leap to, Tom, is that we talk about with nutritionists and we talk to our doctors about, I have a family history of diabetes, how should I be eating? But we don't link use of nutrients or food with our emotions. And I do think that that's the gap that I'm hoping to fill with this book and sharing the information about the stuff to avoid.
Okay, so in our avoid list that we just went through, specifically as it relates to anxiety and a little bit depression, but we had gluten can be problematic.
Yes.
We've got artificial sweeteners. We've got sugar. What are there other sort of major things, or are those like are big to avoid those
processed
three?
Vegetable for anxiety, processed vegetable oils is the other one.
So give me an example of where that hides. I think people will be surprised how many things have that.
Exactly. So, it might be that a restaurant, look, they tend to be oils that are less expensive. So in the restaurant industry and in fast food chains, these are the oils that they use and reuse. And it sets up a huge level of inflammation in our body because what changes is it flips the ratio of our omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. And this is not good for us because what that does is drives inflammation in the body. Here's a great example. I have a few clients who travel a lot for work. And contrary to what you might think, during the pandemic, they started to have a lower level of anxiety. And we noticed this specifically, and it was puzzling me at first, and then I realized, just taking more and more information and asking them, I realized that they were eating more meals at home. So even though they had been trying to pursue a healthy diet, following the guidelines, and they had had an improvement in anxiety, they had a significant improvement by eating meals at home because they know, the oils I'm going to suggest to them are extra virgin olive oil, avocado oil. And one of the things that people don't realize that is super helpful in conditions like anxiety is to up your fiber game. Because fiber-rich foods break down in your body. I mean, I don't need to tell you this, Tom. Break down, in a more complex way and more slowly. So you don't have, think of the sugary donut. And, people have this sugar crash. And first they have a sugar high, then they have a sugar crash. It's all about insulin bouncing all over the place. When you include simple things like having more fiber, your insulin is even, your blood sugar is even. So people who have anxiety don't have these highs and lows. Other things about anxiety are things we know caffeine can drive anxiety, but it's the amount of caffeine, it's how your body tolerates it. It's also caffeine withdrawal. I've had people present with extremes of anxiety because they come and saying, "Doctor, I'm giving up caffeine," and then they have caffeine withdrawal and they're super anxious. Hydration, alcohol, someone imbibes a little bit too much alcohol on a holiday weekend and the next day is somewhat dehydrated, can present with severe anxiety. Hypoglycemia is another one. Just, someone who recently in my practice was trying out a type of fast. I'm not against the type of fasting. I think it always has to be discussed with their doctors, but didn't realize that they hit a very low blood sugar level. So they were hypoglycemic and had panic attacks. So it's all our physiology is all interrelated. You can't do one thing without affecting something else.
Why would being hypoglycemic put you into a panic attack? Is it so when I was really debilitated by anxiety, one thing that I found was if I was cold, then my anxiety would spike hard because the physiological response to being cold and being anxious for me are almost identical.
Absolutely.
And so it almost put it on my mind, if that makes sense. And so my brain just didn't differentiate between I'm cold or I'm anxious.
That's a great example, actually, because with hypoglycemia, people haven't had, say, skipped a meal or haven't eaten or something has happened, they drop their blood sugar. And one of the symptoms of hypoglycemia is sort of feeling nervous or jittery because actually your body is craving, it needs to be fed. And what happens is that I've just seen people, have this spike of anxiety or panic. And what I've said to them is, are you eating regular meals? You may be taking other medications for other conditions. And exactly what are you doing? Are you drinking enough water? And I love the example you gave because it's a similar type of thing. The body perceives it in a certain way. And the way that the brain interprets that is, I'm feeling anxious. But actually what the body is asking for is to be fed, that we need in nutrients. So.
Yeah. Ooh, okay. So this stuff all gets super, super complicated. But when I think about, let's pretend for a minute that our audience is they're like you, they are diet agnostic. So they just want the best.
Okay.
When you were describing hypoglycemia as being a problem, I thought, okay, cool. Then would a ketogenic diet, which I'll call sort of the king of flatline, where your just whole relationship to food is different. Your relationship to hunger is different because you don't go on that wild ride because your body just dips into stored fat. And so you feel pretty even keel all the time. Is that the most anti-anxiety diet, or is there something even better?
I don't know that there's something even better, but what I will say is some studies that are more recent have shown a correlation between ketogenic diets and improved anxiety. So I think that if someone is following that diet and it helps the anxiety and they're otherwise, under the care of a doctor, and why do I say that? Because, simple things that we tell people to eat like grapefruit can interact with multiple medications through liver enzymes. So I'm not saying that glibly to say, oh, you should always talk to your doctor. I am saying if you're assuming a different diet and you're changing things up, just run things by someone who knows your overall conditions, your medical history, and what you might be taking. But there's been some good evidence. So I would say if it's working for someone and they've noticed a lowering of anxiety, definitely try it out and have your doctor review the literature with you.
Okay. you go through in the book a lot of different diseases, and I'm going to jump a little bit out of order because I'm absolutely terrified of
Okay.
running out of time with you because you've
Okay.
got so much great information. I want to talk about dementia and the mind
Hmm.
diet and what we can do to avoid brain fog, cognitive decline. Like,
Hmm.
if and I'll speak for myself here, I very much want to stay crazy sharp until the day I die. So, what would
Hmm.
that sort of ideal, cognitively optimized diet look like?
Okay, great. Things that I like people to embrace are starting with turmeric with black pepper. It's a spice that not only hits the high notes in several conditions, there's a definite association with cognition. So if it's something you cook with or not, at least a quarter teaspoon a day with a pinch of black pepper. Piperine activates the curcumin, makes it more bioavailable by a very huge percent to both the body and the brain. Tip right there. And for those people who don't cook with it, add it to a soup or smoothie or a tea. These are good options for you. It turns out that the polyphenols in olive oil became more available when they were used in a sofrito preparation. So different cultures have different
What
types of preparations.
sofrito? What's that?
Sofrito. Sofrito is the base for, it could be the base for a gumbo, it could be the base, but it's basically onions, garlic. Some cultures have chili pepper. It's different varieties of that. But a particular study showed that this reaction made the polyphenols more available. So I say, if you're going to cook, use the good olive oil, use that gentle simmering temperature, use those ingredients because onions, garlic, they are great prebiotic foods, good for your gut, feed the good bacteria. Why not throw them in? And then, there are also other spices, things like cinnamon, saffron, rosemary, ginger, and sage that had some good results in good data in association with just protecting cognition. Coffee, the suggestion was have coffee, but have, less than 400 milligrams a day, because depending on the size of your cup, that could be about 2 to 3 cups. Have them early in the day. Alcohol was not an entirely negative one, but at the same time, it's all about things in moderation. And if someone is drinking alcohol, I generally suggest red wine because of the resveratrol.
Now, do you think there's
Um,
a hormetic effect to alcohol? To me, alcohol is so. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is my understanding. So,
mhm,
everyone's going to say that there's three macronutrients,
mhm,
fourth being alcohol. And if you look at the order in which the body burns them, it will prioritize alcohol. Now,
mhm.
my gut instinct is that it's prioritizing alcohol because it's a toxin. So, why
Interesting.
would there be anything other than a hormetic effect? Meaning,
Mhm,
for anybody that's never heard that
mhm,
term, that a little bit of bad actually gets your body to sort of push back against it, become more robust and stronger. So
mhm,
it is a
mhm.
toxin, but in a small enough amount, it actually can be beneficial. Think of working out.
I think that's a
Um,
great point. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think it could well be that what the studies basically showed was that it's not that you have to exclude alcohol, it's about moderation and it's the type of alcohol. And what I always say, whether it's this area of the book or anywhere else, everything in moderation. And why do I say that, Tom? Because most individuals who come to my practice are drinking some form of alcohol. So I would rather work with them to use that in moderation and share tips like, hey, if you like cocktails, you're drinking a bunch of sugar because this is what simple syrup is. It's sugar. So here's some tips about, making that a healthier version, drinking less of it, and giving them tips to cope with it. Because that's in my practice of almost 2 decades now. What I find is trying to say to people, don't do something is just behavioral psychology has taught us that's not the way to go. So it's about giving people some healthy options within what they're doing, and then hopefully over time when they see the benefit of something, they start to either taper back or change the habit. That's very different from someone who's struggling with alcohol, obviously. But you also asked me about brain fog, and this is where the antioxidant luteolin rich foods came in. And there were studies that showed that if you incorporate juniper berries, fresh peppermint, sage, thyme, certain types of hot and sweet peppers, these apparently are all luteolin-rich foods. Celery seeds, parsley, artichokes, and dried Mexican oregano, they actually helped with the brain fog. So, I say to people, if you're struggling with that and you want to kind of sharpen things up, start to spices you'll find throughout the book. And one of the reasons they're one of my favorite things is that they last a long time. They salt-free, sugar-free, calorie-free, because I'm not suggesting a mix that has added sodium in it, but they hit the high notes on lots of different conditions. And so it's worth stocking up on those. And it turns out that for brain fog, certain spices can be pretty useful.
What is your take on sodium?
Our body needs sodium. So I think that we just have to be careful about the amount that we consume and where we consume it from. So I think that being aware of the added sodium in processed foods, frozen vegetables can be a great option for people, inexpensive, so that they get their vegetable boost. But if it has a sauce or an added sodium, or the added ingredients are what throw it off. So our body needs sodium, but it's the amount of sodium that we consume in our diets that's usually too high.
No, I'm actually completely unaware, but are there studies that show what happens as you increase your sodium intake? Because obviously you hear a lot about blood pressure, but I've heard that there's like complexity there that people maybe aren't acknowledging, but it's not an area that I'm super knowledgeable about. But the number of times that I've sort of encountered sodium in the literature, I've walked away going, it's really like not that big of a deal, to be honest. But
right.
If I'm crazy, now's the time to tell me, because I eat the most salt. I think you'd be horrified.
A lot of people like salty food. And again, it comes down to, Tom, about a month ago, I was treating a woman had come in to see me for consult, and she brought her adult daughter along with her. And they each had opposite reactions to the same healthy food. And, this speaks to the uniqueness of our bodies and our microbiome, which is mostly unique. So it would take a lot to shock me. I've been hardened by years of practice, but I think it really boils down to someone's individual constitution. If your blood pressure is fine, if you are otherwise healthy, if your blood tests are okay and your doctor's not yelling at you for something, I think that's what it is. Is it good or bad? Probably not great, but is it having any deleterious consequences on your body? It doesn't seem like you look great. But again, it comes back to a person following some guidelines, and that's really what the book is about. It's not for extremes, and it's really meant for someone to pick up, whether it's a therapist, sharing it with her client, his or her client, or person just saying, listen, I want to be healthy. I'm really struggling during the pandemic. My anxiety is through the roof. I've never had problems before. What can I do? Dietary adjustments, as you know from your journey, you can start immediately. You can start making changes. And that, I feel, is empowering for people for two reasons. When a doctor says to you, here, take this prescription, as I have done as well, it's disempowering to someone. You're being told you have to do this, and you have this symptom, and this is what will make you better. I think that nutrition and food flips that ratio and puts a person into the driver's seat of deciding, hey, I can make the choice to go to fast foods today and start to impact my gut bacteria, which we know will change within 24 hours. Or I can say, I'm going to aim for that healthy salad. I'm going to build it up the way that, it was suggested to me. I'm going to add in those lean proteins. I'm going to add in as many colors of the rainbow as I can to bring back healthy phytonutrients and antioxidants for my brain. And I'm going to go in that direction. And a person can feel empowered to make that decision. Now, they still may choose the chips, the ice cream, and the fast foods. But that being said, it's gonna have the effects down the road.
All right, that's an amazing example, and so I want to dive into that so people can take all the things that you've said now and put into how to make that choice in an informed way. So we'll get to the salad in a minute, because I really want to hear, you said to build it up in the way that I was instructed to do. So I want to know more about what that is, because number of people I watch build a salad, and I think you might as well go have a Twinkie, is a lot. But so fast food, I'm going to break down why I think you would say fast food is bad, and then you tell me if this is what you mean. So in the beginning, you laid out 4 things that people really want to avoid, and fast food has them all.
Exactly.
So one I've heard you talk about, which I didn't even know, is that French fries at most fast food restaurants contain sugar.
they contain sugar. You don't
What?
taste it, but the research and development, I was pretty shocked when I came across this years ago, but the research and development is immense for to produce hyper palatable foods. And by that I mean, this is the reason, Tom, that you can't, at the drive-through, you want the biggest size, and when you get the biggest size of the fries, you want to eat all of them. You don't taste the sugar, but it enhances the flavor, and it makes those foods hyper palatable. So, sugar is a big one. And my concept of conveying that is eat the orange, skip the store-bought orange juice. And that's because people think, oh, my doctor said oranges are good, vitamin C. And the labels on the store-bought orange juice say that. But another helpful thing is 4 grams of sugar is 1 teaspoon, because I've said before that our labels in the United States are grams, but we cook, all our recipes are standardized to ounces and pounds. So people don't know how much sugar there is. What does 4 grams mean? So having that simple understanding of how to break it down means that if they get a 4-ounce yogurt, but it's fruited, and it has 24 grams of sugar, well, would you actually be adding that number of teaspoons to plain yogurt if that's something that you eat? Because certainly the ones with active cultures and well-sourced grass-fed milk, dairy yogurts are definitely something. If you eat dairy, you can try. But having those little things at the tip of their fingers is empowering. Knowing that there are 200 names for sugar, and if you look them up, or if you look at the label of something you're buying, then there are 200 names for sugar. But literally, this is a list you can Google. But when you're looking at a food label, always, these are things you can take photographs on from your computer and carry them with you. So if you're buying something, that's actually hiding in sugar. Another culprit, by the way, is glutamates and monosodium glutamates. That's another one that not as many names, but it gets couched in different ways.
You talk pretty powerfully about glutamate. Can you tell people why glutamate matters and what sort of disease states it impacts?
So glutamates are found to really be difficult for conditions like OCD. So it's one of the foods that we suggest to people to really be cautious of when they have symptoms of OCD, because it can be worsened. It can be worsened by these foods. And there are glutamines and glutamic acid in foods that we're used to eating that are not necessarily bad foods, but when you know that they contain glutamates, that you have to be careful if you have OCD. Things like Parmesan cheese, oyster sauce, tomato sauce, miso. Miso is otherwise a fermented food and super good for the gut. But if you're sensitive to glutamates, that could be a source that could drive OCD. So it's about finding, you mentioned sodium and salt. It's about finding that balance for every person. And that's one of the reasons that I put in the book a list of food to avoid, because there are things you have to know to avoid as well.
And for anyone keeping score, glutamate is the G in MSG, correct?
Yes, it is.
Where do you come down on animal protein? Mm-hmm. And it probably makes sense to touch on red meat as well, versus vegetarian. I know that you're agnostic and you can work with anybody on anything.
Yeah.
But in terms of coming up with sort of the ideal, where do you fall on those two?
So, so where I fall on those two is that I think it's about the sourcing, and it's the quantity. If you can get, say you're having beef, grass-fed beef is going to be important, because if not, in the beef industry, cows are, well, so think about when you were little and you saw, photographs in your storybooks. Cows were eating grass. That's certainly what I remember. Well, it turns out that in the industry, they don't actually eat grass. They eat some grass, but they grained off before slaughter. And so the graining off is a process that actually bulks them up. And they also given different medications and things which affects the quality of the meat, because we are what we eat. So that if the cow eats that and we eat the cow, there's that chain. So that's what I mean.
Is this an omega-6 problem? What is it that the cows are getting?
That's one of the problems. The omega-6, the gut disruptors, because they are fed hormones, they're given certain medications for digestion and for other reasons, in terms of how they are bred. But also the actual grain is definitely inflammatory. what I find is that of the different diets, the Mediterranean eating pattern has consistently shown the best results for depression and
All right, give
anxiety.
a quick breakdown of what that is.
Sure. So it's based on the Mediterranean lifestyle and the Mediterranean region in the world, and it's basically a diet that's rich in healthy fats such as avocado, olive oil, lean proteins. So whether it's chicken or seafood, it's very heavy on seafood, but good sources of seafood, and then beans, nuts, legumes, healthy whole grains. Chickpeas, those types of ingredients, and it's consistently shown in studies to have helped individuals with mood and anxiety. So I think that's important for people to know. Is it the perfect diet? Maybe not for everyone, but it's a good guideline. Because my feeling about this, Tom, is that if people are consuming, you know, for example, there's a study that showed that eating trans fats is associated with aggression. So once again, we come back to if you're eating these foods, you might have problems with these behaviors. And if you are, or if you get worsening of symptoms, you may want to think about cutting back on that. I feel like it's a stepwise pathway to well-being and mental well-being. Because if someone's just eating the wrong type of diet, how can I encourage them on toward a healthier path? Because I think it's hard when you either pull out your prescription pad or in my version of the work I do in nutritional psychiatry, I say, well, you have to eat this. So I try really not to do that. My method is really about what is it that when you come in to see me are the steps that I think you can try and that you feel you can commit to. Because if you're not going to do them, then you're just going to leave my office. It's like going to a physical therapy appointment and not practicing the exercises. Your
Yeah.
injuries, it's not going to get better.
So what are some of those early sort of easy wins that people can do? I know that it's going to be so specific. And so I'm just sort of pitching right to the middle of your sort of average person that comes to see you. I'm
Right.
guessing they have anxiety or they have depression. And they're not going to want to give up all the lovely things that they eat.
Right.
So what are some easy switches or swaps or however you approach it?
Exactly. So I like the prebiotic foods because we those are easy to include. Things like the allium family, onions, garlic, leeks, off the top of my head, jicama and a few others. There's a longer list in the book, but those actually just feed the bugs what they need to thrive. So right there, I'm speaking about mental health because that's what I care about the most. But the truth is, by balancing your gut bacteria or your gut bugs, because it's not just bacteria, in a good way, you're also taking care of your immunity, which is largely housed in the gut, and you're doing your body good because you're fighting down inflammation. Yes, inflammation drives mental health diseases and mental well-being, but you're also helping the level of inflammation in your body. So it's just a good basic starting point. Fermented foods, kefir, miso, kimchi, any of those add back a great gut element for you. Another thing is eat the rainbow. So why do we talk about the colors of vegetables? Because by gamifying it, and I say to my patients, how many colors of vegetables can you eat in a week or in a day or in however you break it down? And did you know that red bell peppers have some of the highest levels of vitamin C, and that's really good for you. So making that something that becomes a pillar of what they do, prebiotics, probiotics, the color of the rainbow and why, and telling them the reason why this helps your gut bacteria. It reduces inflammation. It adds back antioxidants. Just simple pillars like that. And then, of course, I love to go into the spices and try to introduce them to more interesting flavors, but also good brain benefits.
I want to go into some of the micronutrients. You'd mentioned at the top, you've got magnesium, vitamin D, which we haven't talked about, but I know that you have pretty extensive understanding of the importance of that. But talk to me about magnesium. What is the importance? Can we get it in diet? Do we need to supplement? What is?
It turns out that magnesium, people are very frequently deficient in magnesium, and magnesium is associated with high levels of depression and high levels of anxiety. So, one of the things I will do is if someone comes in with those symptoms, I will check a magnesium level. But it's an easy thing to replenish. And if someone is super anxious, it's best to try out supplementing it while they also up their game in terms of their diet. And in chapter 11 of the book, that's why we broke down nutrients and then foods that you can find it. So it's an easy reference. Say that you find you're deficient in magnesium or you're feeling anxious. It's an easy thing to start to increase in your diet as well.
Yeah. Oh, in fact, we have to close the loop on that salad thing. So
Yes.
salads are something that when I think of, okay, eat the rainbow, amazing advice, putting all this stuff together, but then you can ruin it depending on what sauce you put on it or what are some of the things. So somebody that I know well will make a salad, but then they'll put like crushed nacho chips in it. And so they do things that is like, oh, you were doing good right until the end. What should a salad look like?
So, a few things. I'm laughing because it's so true. In this country, like we think, oh, I'm going to get a healthy lunch, and then there's all these toppings on them, which are like tons of calories right there,
Yeah.
and not calories in the good way. I mean, I'm not a big one for counting calories. I think it's much more about the whole food. But that being said, that's an excellent point. We need to kind of take a step back from the ranch and figure out, easier, better, healthier dressings to do. So I've even taught our medical students, this is the way to make a vinaigrette, a healthy fat, an acid that you like, salt, pepper, shake it in a mason jar because it's going to save you money. It doesn't have all that added sodium and preservatives and stabilizers that a salad dressing and sugar that salad dressings have. I start with a mixture of greens. I try to have people eat a diversity of greens because the folate there's a particular bacteria that has actually been shown to be super helpful in terms of folate. So there's a reason that I ask people to add more greens to their diet. And I even like people to add things like herbs like parsley. It's another green to your diet. Things that diversify the flavor, make it interesting to you. Dandelion greens. Cut up some bok choy into your salad. It doesn't have to just be lettuce. Spinach is a great option. And then the colors. I like to go for colors and texture. So colors are all the types of sweet peppers, bell peppers are great for you. And cucumbers, super low calorie vegetable, great crunch, good flavor. All of these have vitamins. So think about the nutrients and vitamins that you're bringing back. And I like radicchio, different color, different texture, different taste. I love arugula for that peppery bite. And then nuts and seeds, adding in, chickpeas, great source of plant-based protein. And we're talking, quarter cup for the whole salad. You can throw in black beans. You can throw in white beans. You can build it up. Even a simple thing, if you don't want to make a vinaigrette, a squeeze of lemon, salt, pepper, and some lemon zest on a salad is delicious. The other herb I love to add is basil. So, the more that you can kind of build a salad, I had practiced this one once, and actually more than once at different patients. But the one that I remember is how much it helped her diabetes, and I'll explain why. She was taking meals to work, but she was taking relatively unhealthy meals that were not filling. It was impacting her blood sugar. Her Dexcom monitor kept going off. She was then reaching for unhealthy snacks at work. Her break room had, peanut butter crackers or something, and she'd grab that because she knew her blood sugar was lower. But by adding in a healthy, wholesome salad, she would actually, she'd call me up the next week and she said, I'm so full every day at lunch that I'm feeling so much better just from greens and what I'm describing. It wasn't anything, and she might add a little bit of chicken. Sometimes she added a small piece of salmon, but she really was eating through those greens, stabilizing her blood sugar, feeling better. She lost weight, not within a week. That took time, but there's a lot to be said for the filling ingredients, which are fiber rich, which are bringing back those positive ingredients. So, I kind of laugh to myself when someone rolls their eyes if I say salad, but I'm saying it for many other different reasons, and for important reasons related to brain health.
What made me rethink about the salad thing is just the notion of micronutrients and making sure that you're getting sort of this wide array of things. Is there a basic suite of supplements or anything that you recommend? My entire life, I basically tried to avoid it. So D3 is sort of the only thing that I've ever consistently supplemented with. I have recently started doing magnesium and K2. But is there anything else? Is there a suite of things that you just know the average person isn't getting enough of?
So, I think it depends on the symptom. I think magnesium, many people are deficient in, but again, being a doctor, I'm going to say have it level checked because that's a scientific way of us knowing whether you're deficient or not. I think D3 is a good, safe thing to do because many of us are deficient, especially depending on the part of the country. I live in the Northeast and I know many of us are deficient. And I think that with others relating to the mental health symptoms, for example, take saffron. So saffron has a significant number of evidence for improvement of depression, but it's a very expensive spice. You use a tiny, few threads in, say, biryani or a risotto or paella. So it's not necessarily going to convert to the type of dosing you need. That might be an appropriate place where we can get a supplement.
Your book is full of so many things. We haven't even touched on like half the disease states that you go into. This is incredibly, incredibly powerful information. Where can people find the book? Where can they learn more about you? Where can they really drink deeply of your wisdom?
Thank you so much, Tom. So they can find me on social media at Dr. Uma Naidoo, which is at DRUMANAIDOO. And we're always putting out new and updated information on social media, especially Instagram and tweeting. We try to share studies that are recent and things like that. And my website is umanaidoomd.com. That's UMANAIDOOMD.com. And that will link you to where you can purchase the book, but you can also get it at your local bookstore or wherever books are sold.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Guys, this stuff is important. Food and mood being connected. Like there's just no question about it. Thank you so much for coming on today. By the way, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Thank you guys so much for watching and being a part of this community. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. You're going to get weekly videos on building a growth mindset, cultivating grit, and unlocking your full potential.